in the lap of the Himalayas in a landlocked country, I could think of no better term than this topic for the 7 member countries to pursue in the near future. The other point I would like to mention is, of course, in the expanse of this very broad topic, there needs to be some sort of a focus, and I hope that the speakers will do so to draw their attention to the BIMSTEC study, the BTIL, or in other words, it's called the BIMSTEC Transport Infrastructure and Logistics Study, which was done in 2018. So in other words, this study is already 5 years old, and its target is to implement a host of projects, more than 250 or so, by 2028. So we are already halfway before we really started the implementation. And I'm not going to go through all, through the topics as such, but just to introduce you, it talks of border roads, port access roads, coordination road program among the member countries, and talks about through transport agreements, which are absent at the moment between and among countries, rail connectivity, development of deeper water ports, container handling facilities in the PO Bengal ports, inland waterways, expansion of air capacity, development of freight sources, then border infrastructure, construction of dry ports or inland container depots, simplification and harmonization of trade documents, and for the development of automation in trade. So these are many issues, and in as much as our panel would probably have mentally prepared what they're going to say in this session, I would appreciate if you could share your views in on some of them and how we could possibly move ahead to take them forward. Okay. Having said that, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today, and I would like to ask, let me introduce him. He is a very accomplished, professional, Dr. Vignaraj, whom I have come to know very recently. He is a non-resident fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University in Singapore, and a senior research associate at ODI in London. He's a member of the Monetary Policy Consultative Committee of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. In a career spanning over 30 years in UK and Asia, Dr. Vignaraj has held senior roles in international organizations, as Director of Research at the ADB Institute in Tokyo, Chief Program Officer at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, and Visiting Scholar at the IMF Institute in Washington, D.C. And also a Government Executive Director, and also Executive Director of ALKI, which is very, 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 very appropriate, that you are participating under the aegis of this institute. And he's also been in the Prime Minister's Task Force on the Indian Ocean, and has worked in the Maxwell Stamp, which is, I think, is a international consulting company. He has published 20 books or more, and led teams to develop complex projects over 30 countries in all over the world. Dr. Vignaraj has a Doctor of Philosophy in Economics from no other university Oxford, Dr. Vignaraj, you have the floor. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much to SANEM and LKI for having me here. I want to make 3 points just to set some food for thought for this session. The first is really about the costs and benefits of regional infrastructure projects. And research suggests that essentially there is an 8-to-1 ratio between the benefits from investing in regional infrastructure and the financial costs. And that estimate comes from a study that I did some time ago with Mike Plummer, and Prabhuti was also on part of that. And we found that if South Asia, which is the 5 BIMSTEC countries, and Southeast Asia, which includes our 2 BIMSTEC members, but the broader group, invest around $72 billion, you could get economic benefits of $563 billion. And this was estimated using a model approach. But the challenge with all of this is that there is an asymmetric distribution of the financial costs and the benefits between the 2 regions. So South Asia invests relatively less in this amount, but it sees much greater benefit. Southeast Asia has to invest the greater share of that amount of 72 billion, but sees less benefit. So there is a big issue here of building trust in this BIMSTEC region, of looking for new types of financing, such as public-private sector partnerships, which are very difficult, and to coordinate across countries, and to also open to investment and trade. That's my first point. The second point I want to briefly talk about is that financing the infrastructure needs remains very challenging in BIMSTEC, and there's a big infrastructure investment gap in BIMSTEC, meaning the difference between what is spent by governments today and what needs to be spent in the future if we want to grow, and there's this enormous gap, and it appears to be widening over time. I did some back-of-the-envelope estimates in thinking about this webinar, and we are going to be refining this in one of the papers for this project, but you get a number something like 120 billion per year is this infrastructure investment gap. Now, this number doesn't sound very big, but it's about the third of the size of the economy of Bangladesh, right? Something like that, right? So, you know, it's a doable number, right? Potentially. I mean, this number probably is an underestimate, okay? It doesn't include 5G investment, which is going to be very large. It doesn't capture you know, all the integration that you need to get a multimodal infrastructure system, road, rail, air, which is terribly important in our region, and so on. So I look forward to looking at this master plan. We've been waiting to see it for some time, and I hope it contains, you know, better estimates of this gap that needs to be financed, and also what are the projects. And the projects at 2 levels, those for the countries that are landlocked, around India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, that Nepal cluster, and that's about roads and rail. And then there is the sea-locked countries, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and so on. Maldives, of course, is important in a different sense. And we have to see what the different types of infrastructure are needed. The third and last point I want to talk about is something that was mentioned earlier, is really about the fact that infrastructure is both hardware and software. We tend to forget this, and I have to underline that point. And it's fascinating that there's this kind of motor vehicular agreement there. And I think that's quite useful to allow one bit of BIMSTEC to actually work very well. And that's the landlocked bit, right? But then the sea-locked countries, those are the ones that need to be looked at. And there, this issue of the complex issue of customs reform, right? Because if you have ports, like in, say, Sri Lanka, where we are now, and you have this issue of trade facilitation, you need to have paperless trade, right? And this integrated gateway that my colleague Vacharas talked about, I think is a very interesting idea. And it has a lot of potential, right, to reduce trade costs and to mitigate the cost of trade, particularly rent-seeking behavior, and to help the transformation of the digital economy. But there are lots of practical issues. That's the problem. Okay? The first is operational challenges. There's the issue of user fees, interoperability of these multiple systems. Each country has some type of digital project in progress, right? Now, do you put them together as one, but you'll have interoperability problems, or do you create an entirely new one and start from scratch, right? And that's a big issue, right? In ASEAN, we face that, and I don't think it's properly solved, right, if I've got that right. And also, what's the regulatory framework, right? The BIMSTEC Secretariat we talked about is unable to regulate something like this. We'll have to have a new system of customs cooperation and regulation. Then we have the very interesting issue that's happening today of cybercrime, right? With the Russia-Ukraine crisis, there's been a spike in what they call digital warfare, and cybercrime will follow for sure. I think our countries, sadly, are very ill-prepared. We had the sad issue not so long ago with the Bangladesh bank hack, which was also linked to, sadly, in Sri Lankan context. And that shows us how vulnerable we are. And there have been, I think, my estimates from security people tell me that there have been a massive increase in cyber attacks. So if we build this integrated system, it's got to be secure. And that requires big money to make sure that the security is in place. The third important issue is something we also discussed, is the less developed countries and the weaker countries. We have India and Thailand, which are at the forefront, and I hope Bangladesh, Salim, in the future will be another leader in the BIMSTEC region. But then what about the rest? Right? Aid for trade is going to have to come. And sadly, the bigger, more equipped countries that are growing fast are going to have to meet that. So in conclusion, I think we've got to think very carefully about these three issues. And the benefits are there compared to the financial cost. We're going to have to think of new modes of financing them, and we're going to have to think of trade facilitation in a different way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Vignaraj, for being so precise and keeping the time limit. And you made very, very important and interconnected remarks in relation to connectivity, and it's very interesting to hear the calculations that you have made regarding the funds that may be required if we were to improve connectivity in the BIMSTEC region. Definitely, the last point you mentioned about infrastructure, both hardware and software, is of critical importance to all member countries because it directly impinges on the speed of business that we can do across the border, and therefore, in the same context, the border infrastructure that is needed for facilitating trade is of utmost importance. Now, let me move to the next panelist and continue our discussion. Next is my colleague, Dr. Prabhir Singh, who is well known within South Asia, and he has done a lot of work in the region, rather in the sub-region, in relation to trade facilitations and trade. He currently is a professor in the Research and Information System of Developing Countries, or RIS, in New Delhi. And he heads the ASEAN India Center at RIS. So we couldn't have a better person to sort of, to connect the success of ASEAN and apply to BIMSTEC in the future. He has over 3 decades of research experience. I know that he writes very extensively in papers and within the region. His work is in the field of international economics and has research interests in international trade and development. He has been conducting policy research for the government of India and several national and international organizations, including UN agencies and multilateral organizations. He's very much, as a Bengali, brought up and really, educated in Kolkata. He did his PhD from Jadavpur University and worked for government of West Bengal. and also in the National Institute of Rural Development in India. He was visiting fellow at the Institute of Developing Economics in Japan, the ADI Institute in Tokyo, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, Seoul, and visiting senior fellow at the SCAP. Let's hear Professor Prabhuti. You have the floor, Prabhuti.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, and given the time constraint, I'll come straight to the point. And following my previous speaker, Dr. Vignaraj's very illuminating presentation, so I take where he ends actually, that the region, the Bay of Bengal regions, we need new types of financing. He touched about or given hints to go for aid for trade and cybersecurity safety issues, less developed country versus relatively higher developed countries. And then, if you read the summit yesterday, which concluded, the declarations and the speeches of the several leaders, which comes very common that a study, multimodal master plan study is completed, and Foreign Secretary today morning, he said that about a 40 billion plus within 120 projects, but at 2018 prices, a nominal term, identified for opening for the projects. Hopefully, these projects will come in for investments, or depending on the member states, their interest. In the changing scenario of the countries coordinating their line of activities in terms of cooperation. So I think Thailand is handling connectivity. It is no more on India. India is now looking at the security aspects, whereas Thailand is looking at the connectivity in the Bay of Bengal. Now, given the Thailand's rich experience in ASEAN and CLMVT or ACMEX projects and in the GMS, so I think this is a good time for the Bay of Bengal region or BIMSTEC to work for more seriously with the connectivity projects. It's not possible to pick up everything in the multimodal transit transport projects or any kind of master plan that identified. But we may need to pick up a couple of them, which are, for example, Dr. Vignaraj is looking at hardware aspects, software aspects. If I may come to for the region as in hardware, let's complete the trilateral highway, which is Kunwacharat, he spoke about in the morning previous session. As you know, the trilateral highway at the moment, there is 112 kilometer inside Myanmar is under construction. 112 kilometer, it's basically 50 kilometer on the land and valley, and the rest is on the hill. And these are, once it is done, hopefully by 2023, next year end, Indian company called National Highway Authority of India, which has been under construction. Indian government is giving almost about 1 billion plus money just as a kind of technical assistance, not as in line of credit. So once this is completed, that highway will be ready. But we can't operate our vehicles, what Dr. Vignaraj has, he said, the software aspects, which is the motor vehicle agreement. BBIN motor vehicle agreement, we have not yet completed. The protocols, 3 protocols, we have not yet completed. So given that experience, I think member countries of the BIMSTEC, they need to facilitate the discussion. There are issues, Kunwacharat knows it. If he can take back our message to the foreign ministry in the Thailand, and if you look at what Dr. Raihan said in the morning, that if you do a reforms, you gain in the medium to long run. Those who can't, you cannot run the economy with a subsidy. So those who Truckers Association in Thailand or Myanmar, those who are opposing trilateral highway opening up, I think they need to carefully do the calculations, the gains and the losses. So trilateral highway, once it is done, and extension to the other parts of ASEAN, I think this is a corridor of opportunity. It's going for Bangladesh, for all others. And to make it happen, the motor vehicle agreement negotiations has to be completed in war footing state. Point 2, on the software side, and I conclude, that 7 countries, they have a national custom single window, right? And Dr. Vignaraj nicely said that it is landlocked, sea-locked, ocean-locked in that sense. Now, Sri Lanka, which is the hub, Sri Lanka is the role model when it comes to maritime connectivity. Whereas Thailand comes as a country when it's a hub for the multimodal. It's a beautiful airport, it's fast-moving private sectors, etc., etc. So by pooling their common resources, the region can gain in the customs cooperation, for example. Thailand has a national single window in the customs. Say Sri Lanka has, I won't say it's a custom single window, but Sri Lanka has a fair amount of good applications of digital technology and things like that in managing the ports and logistics. India has introduced custom single window. Nepal, Bhutan is in the process. Bangladesh is in the process. Myanmar is in the process. So perhaps a project could be taken up at a regional single window of customs, and there is a best practice. There is an example, like USAID supported ASEAN to coming up with the regional single window in the customs. ASEAN has introduced ASEAN ACTS, one document, one vehicle can take cargo from on land from anywhere. At least they have started the 6 countries. It will be extended to the rest of others. So this supported by USAID. The custom single window in ASEAN is a big success. Probably that is giving an indication that if we need to do kind of a regional single window in the customs, there are honest partners here who can support. Finally, since Thailand is taking over from tomorrow the BIMSTEC chair, Thailand is also leading the connectivity the chair in the regions, and given that Thailand's experience in the Bay of Bengal, that Renong port, the port in the Mayak in the eastern coast of Thailand, and in the Bay of Bengal, Chittagong, and several other ports, and Colombo on the other hand. So now we have this coastal shipping agreement being negotiated. And the main advantage of the coastal shipping agreement, which I could learn from picking up the literature, is that they have said that if there is a vessel which is registered in the region, so Sri Lanka vessels having a Sri Lanka flag or Bangladesh vessel having Bangladesh flag, they can go into serve anywhere in the coast, in the region. They don't need to pay taxes, duties, they don't need to permissions. Only the person who is driving the vessels, they have to do some formalities. So because of other incidences if it happens. So fairly good amount of deep integration is coming up, a coastal shipping agreement. While we go ahead with the coastal shipping agreement, I think we also need for, going one step ahead from tomorrow, 1st April, go for a short sea shipping, which is kind of almost making the maritime connectivity is kind of a seamless kind of arrangement. And this is possible because Thailand is leading the connectivity part of it. So with that, I could only give some kind of recommendations, and I stop here. Perhaps the SANEM and LKI will pick up some of the points I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dave, for your very practical suggestions. You talked about the need for prioritization of projects, because definitely we cannot pick all of them. So that's, I think, is very a practical step. So in other words, to relook at what the master plan talks about. And I was, as a matter of fact, just before this session, I was just quickly going through the master plan. And many of the projects that have been mentioned, for instance, in Bhutan, have been completed or are in the advanced stage. So I suppose this case would be the same in other countries, and we need to take stock and plan what is required to be done urgently in the near future. The trilateral highway, a very interesting development for South Asia's connectivity with Southeast Asia. In as much as that highway is important, I think we need to see how you really going to utilize the highway once it is completed, because the software part needs to be worked out, so that there is a vehicles can move smoothly. And in this context, I think you mentioned about the BBIN motor vehicle agreement, which as a matter of fact, the agreement was signed here in Thimphu some years back, and it has made some progress, but not enough. And I wish that BIMSTEC would learn from what has happened in the BBIN, but I doubt if there will be much to learn at the moment, because much work needs to be done. Then on the customs connectivity, the single window is extremely important for all of us, especially landlocked countries like Bhutan and Nepal. The many countries have come up with their own systems, and we need to see how we can connect the system, develop and connect the systems, so that documents can be exchanged as promptly as possible. Thank you so much. Sorry, before I just give the floor to the other, the last speaker, I just want to say, in the context of the trilateral highway, for those of us, in this part of the world, the note I want to emphasize that improvement of connectivity between I guess India and its northeast part, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, to this northeast part of India is extremely important, and perhaps there could be a project to see how greater collaboration and integration can take place in this region as a measure to connect to South and Southeast Asia. Thank you. So my final, the final speaker today is let me introduce him, Dr. Ruth Banum. He is a leading logistics development expert in Southeast Asia. He has drafted legislation and assisted ASEAN in endorsing the roadmap for the integration of ASEAN logistics in 2007. He has developed, based on his PhD research, a cost-time-distance model that is currently being used as a reference in assessing economic corridor performance by agencies such as ESCAP, UNCTAD, ADB, and the World Bank. And let me mention personally, I have worked on his model for analysis of trade here in Bhutan. Dr. Ruth is currently Dean of the Thammasat Business School in Thammasat University in Thailand. He holds a PhD from the international logistics from Cardiff Business School in the United Kingdom. Dr. Ruth Banum, you have the floor. Again, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Achut, and it's good to see you virtually. So, first of all, I think I would like to thank LKI, SANAM, USAID for giving me the opportunity to join this esteemed panel virtually in Colombo. And I would also like to thank Prabhir for giving Thailand so much credit in the thing that Thailand is doing. It's quite interesting because if you are in the country, I think you feel slightly differently. So maybe there's a challenge in terms of the perception, because maybe I am in the country and I feel that things are not moving as fast as they should. But maybe this is a discussion for another time over a nice cup of tea. So allow me to start first with this discussion that I was hearing from the previous session, talking about maybe proposing a trade facilitation agreement for the BIMSTEC. My personal opinion is that we don't really need a new regional trade facilitation agreement, except if we, the BIMSTEC, are willing to go further than the WTO TFA. Because if we're not willing to go further, then there's no need to do a new one. The first thing that needs to be done is at least have it fully implemented in all of the 7 countries. And I can say as a fact, even in Thailand, the WTO TFA is not fully implemented. So, instead of trying to complicate things, we should go back to the basic and put this effort in harmonizing and fully implementing the TFA. But that's more on the software aspect. In the topic that we were supposed to talk about, discuss about today, infrastructure connectivity and multimodal transport, again, this is, I think, an area where I haven't heard a lot about. So how are we within the BIMSTEC going to enable multimodal transport? If you look at the case of ASEAN, ASEAN has a framework agreement on multimodal transport, but there is no such discussion yet at the BIMSTEC level. And this is something that is very critical, because we may talk about the infrastructure, the building of roads, airports, so on and so forth, but what we need to have is also the institutional or the software or the legislation for enabling multimodal transport within the BIMSTEC. So there's a whole legal aspect that hasn't been addressed yet, because we tend still to focus on multimodal transport from an operational perspective. How do you actually provide door-to-door transport? But then you have all of these issues related to liability regimes, related to the documentation that is needed, related to the legal status of the multimodal transport operator. So I think this is a big homework. If connectivity is to be developed, we need to think in terms of who are going to be the service providers that will enable that connectivity. Because infrastructure on its own cannot do anything if there's no one to use it. So I think this is one aspect that needs to be highlighted and be taken up maybe quite quickly. And some of the experience can be taken from ASEAN, the challenges that ASEAN have had in trying to implement its framework agreement on multimodal transport. If I'm not mistaken, it was signed in 2005, and still at the moment, it is still not fully implemented. And talking about multimodal transport, I was discussing from an institutional perspective. If you look at the hardware perspective of multimodal transport, the location of the intermodal facilities becomes then very, very critical. So what are the intermodal facilities? These are the facilities where you can change transport mode. So the capacity of that facility, but also the equipment. Because when we look at multimodal transport or enabling multimodal transport, the key unit that is being used for transportation is the container. And then the next challenge for the container, is it going to be a maritime container or is it going to be a land container? Because if it's a maritime container, then you also have these issues of weight. So you'll be carrying a lot of iron and maybe not being able to carry a lot of goods. So these intermodal facilities needs to be developed within this overall network of this overall logistics network, logistics channels within the BIMSTEC. But the challenge within the BIMSTEC is that if you look at intra-regional trade, it is roughly around 6%, intra-regional trade between the various BIMSTEC member countries. And unless if we cannot, increase this intra-regional trade, then the challenge is, will it be worth it to invest in the infrastructure, especially the regional infrastructure? And what follows from the intermodal facility are, of course, the cross-border facilities and the type of facilities that are needed to enable border crossing to be as efficient as possible. I think, as we all know, border crossing are probably the weakest link in the overall system, because this is where the goods have to stop, the truck has to stop, the driver has to stop and go through a number of processes. And that is done twice at each border. My colleague Vignaraj was talking about the cross-border transport agreement a few moments ago. Yeah, sure, but at the moment, the theory is nice, but then implementation. I think at the end of the day, we know what needs to be done. There are many examples, but then the challenge is the actual implementation. And my question would be, is there actually an actual political will to implement? It's always very nice. We just had this BIMSTEC meeting. Initially, I thought the Prime Minister of Thailand would go there, but then after we read the statement, how do we actually operationalize all of this? And just to highlight my point is, Achut was referring to the connectivity master plan for the BIMSTEC. And if you look, for example, at the projects from Thailand, yeah, they're very good project, doing roads, going to the border. But in fact, these projects are not BIMSTEC specific. These are national projects. And I think this is where it's very important that as a BIMSTEC, we need to agree on the regional projects and how these regional projects are going to be funded. Because if there's no funding for the regional project and expect each of the members countries to support financially the development of each, regional project, then that's going to be challenging, because you are, in fact, competing for the same national budget. So, two ways of doing it. Either you align the domestic projects to the BIMSTEC connectivity master plan, or what you need to do is to be able to have for regional project. If we look at, and I just want to pick up on some of the things that my colleague Prabhir was talking about, the coastal shipping agreement, is that it's like a tentative version of wanting to eliminate cabotage. As long as we're there, sometimes we need to be ambitious, because a step-by-step approach is nice, but that is never fast enough for the private sector. The private sector would like to see changes as quickly as possible. So we need to be bold in our ambition for the BIMSTEC, the vision for the BIMSTEC. So, coastal shipping agreement, that's nice. How about eliminating cabotage? Are we willing to do that? I'm not the person to say yes or no, but I think these are issues that needs to be explored. So, final note is we need to be a lot more ambitious than what we are doing at the moment within the BIMSTEC. So, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for your very, pointed remarks. What we need to do. It's interesting that you mentioned, do we need a new FTA for BIMSTEC? I think certainly we should see what progress we have made in terms of implementing the FTA under WTO, and perhaps one could work within that framework. Because I don't think BIMSTEC is going to go beyond the provisions of the WTO FTA, at least at this stage. So there may be no need to invent a new wheel there. Then the next point he mentioned was about the working about the nitty-gritty of the multimodal connectivity. I think we need to really look, where do all these jigsaw puzzle, connect. So there's a lot of detailed work that needs to be done in the operationalization of multimodal agreements, even if we have one. We have not talked about it at the moment. I fully concur with this view that border crossings probably are the weakest link within our region, and especially from sitting here in Bhutan and having seen borders around, that certainly seems to be the case. And let me just mention, I went on a program, visitors program. There is an international visitors program in the United States. I think it was about 25 years back. I think 1998. And they asked me, in the field work where they wanted me to go. At that time, I was the Director General of Trade here in Bhutan. And I said, look, I want to see a border trade, how it operates. So they took me to a place, to the US-Mexican border, right down in Arizona, a place called Nogales. That's the border point. And that was, as I said, that was 1998. And I just, stood there. There was a truck coming from the Mexican side to the US side. And I waited and counted, I had a watch in my wrist, and I counted. It just took about a minute for that truck to cross. So the driver, has a paper, he just hands it over to the customs officer at the kiosk, and he sees it, does something, and, there the truck passes, So, now maybe even that document is not required to be presented because we can do all this, electronically, So there is certainly a lot to be done at the border. Perhaps this is an area of priority, for BIMSTEC countries, and of course the modalities as to how you want to implement projects, whether the national projects connect to the regional projects, or you want to have exclusively regional projects, because at the end of the day it's the same thing, but the modalities have to be agreed, and perhaps it may have to be both, not either or, because different countries have different situations perhaps. So thank you very much, Ruth. So now I open the floor for discussion, and I would appreciate if Dr. Raihan can help me from Colombo.
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Bhandari. We have got a question in the chat box by Mr. Somesh Mathur. Would you like to start with that? And I also encourage the participants in the Zoom chat Zoom, if you can share your views or comments in the chat box. And then once we actually address these comments in the Zoom chat box, then we can come to the audience here who are in presence. So shall I read that question?
That's fine, Dr. Raihan. I would like to end in 10 minutes. So in Bangladesh, Bhutan time is 1:34.
Yeah.
So I would like to end it at 1:45. I'm sure many of you are hungry, and if you are hungry, you are angry. So let's have discussions for 10 minutes, and you can start with the question in the chat box.
Yes, the question by Somesh Mathur is that within BIMSTEC, we need to decide whether agriculture, industry and services and its subsectors, which one of them promotes growth with environmental sustainability. This will help us to roadmap the progress. Communications, transport, electricity can be prioritized with financial services. Agriculture and allied activities, including meat and meat products, more from employment point of view. Alternative energy resources are the future. So I think this is more of a comment rather than a question. I don't see any other question, Mr. Bhandari, in the chat box, but we can definitely now come back to the audience here.
Please do, yes, from the audience, if there are any questions. Before we go to the audience, on the comments that Mr. Mathur has mentioned, would anybody want to make any comments from the panel? Especially Dr. Vignaraj.
Dr. Vignaraj had to leave early because of he has.
Okay, sorry, doesn't matter. Maybe Prabhir can pick it up if you think it's relevant, or it's just a comment. It's a lot of issues there.
So, Dr. Prabhuti.
No. What is the question?
I think it's more of a comment.
Professor Somes' comments and is exactly not addressing to, not addressed to us. So probably I'd like to just give it a go by. So,
okay, fair enough. Fair enough, Prabhir. Let's go to the floor, and Dr. Ryan, could you please manage it there?
Yes, I'm trying to see if there is any question. Anybody, question or comment?
busy for food.
Yes. Yes, we have got a question from
Unfair to ask
Dr.
about
Mendes.
Dr. Vignaraj, and he's not here. His first point, that proportion between investment and return, on infrastructure, he said it's 8 to 1, no? 8 to 1, something like that. Could you expand that to see what did he exactly mean in his first point? That was not very clear. The return was proportionality. He said 8 to 1. Is it on the investment on infrastructure? Or what was his point?
He was referring to the study he did with another organization.
Yes,
He did some modeling,
yes.
and what he was trying to tell, if I may answer what I could understood, because I was also part of the team,
Yes.
that the association between investment and infrastructure development. So what he said, that one unit capital injection or investment in the economy will lead to 1 unit rise of infrastructure in terms of roads, ports, highway. That's what his
Yes, that's right. Yes.
assessment, quantitative assessment indicates. So that's what, if I may tell.
Will we comment on that proportion?
Well, this is an empirical evidence, so I have no comments. This is this is good, only I can say, because I was also part of the team, and I just say like that, that this is an empirical evidence, and this is indeed needed while you look at the relations between investment and infrastructure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any question here? I have a question, if Mr. Bhandari, if you can allow me.
Oh, definitely, please.
Yes, I have a question to Dr. Prabhir then. Also, Ruth is here too. We have not got Dr. Vignaraj to continue here. The question is, many of these countries now in South Asia, if I take, for example, Bangladesh, is investing quite a lot on infrastructure.
Okay, we continue the discussion. Okay, okay, sure. I think, all of this discussion maybe shows that within the BIMSTEC, I use this word, the soul. What is the soul of the BIMSTEC? I think we haven't.
Is Mr. Bhandari is connected?
I agree with you, Ruth. I remember joined BIMSTEC in 2004. I was in Phuket, right? That's when Bhutan, Nepal, and I think even Myanmar, maybe Myanmar had joined earlier. Bhutan and Nepal joined. And there was so much of excitement, because we were a member, well, we still are, member of SARC. And SARC had not really progressed, and we're hoping that BIMSTEC would be a panacea to some extent. But unfortunately, due to various reasons, really did not take off, hasn't yet taken off. But it's good to see that there is some momentum being gaining, especially from the Goa discussion of leaders in 2016. So it's taken another 5 years now to come to this stage. Our hope here from Bhutan is that under Thailand's chairmanship from tomorrow, we will be able to achieve some concrete results and show to our constituencies, that look, BIMSTEC is not just a talk shop, but this is what we have done. Obviously, there are many areas of cooperation, many sectors have met, there are regional institutions, but at the end of the day, what is the dollar gain per person out of regional cooperation in each country, right?
Yeah.
This topic,
Mr. Bhandari, can you hear us? We are back now.
Yes, we can hear you.
We had a power cut. So can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. And in the absence, Ruth and I were having very interesting discussion here.
All right. We missed that discussion, and honestly, but thank you so much for continuing the discussion, Mr. Bhandari.
Yeah, no, let me just, I was having a discussion with Ruth that what I was going to say, I just want to, I've had my, we're talking about optimism, that is shown from Colombo Summit. But what I was saying, was going to say to Ruth is that I think there can be no better country than Thailand to take the chairmanship now, and also the lead country for connectivity. So Thailand and this BIMSTEC Secretariat, which has been now tasked to come with an action plan, the two parties will have very detailed discussions and come up with very concrete projects for us to take up in the near future. To you, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you very much. I think, I was sincerely thankful to you for continuing the discussion. I have a very quick question, but I think since we have almost exhausted the time, probably we can wrap up in 5 minutes.
Right,
Mr. Bhandari, if you allow us.
Two more minutes.
Yeah, so quick question to Dr. Prabhuti and Dr. Ruth is that many of these countries, they are undertaking infrastructure, national projects and infrastructure projects. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and some other countries too. But what do you see the kind of challenge in integrating these national initiatives to the kind of regional initiatives? Do you see the kind of gap is there in terms of planning, in terms of coordination? Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Quickly, indeed there are gaps. See, regional cooperation always come at the second layer. The first layer is the country's own priorities, which we call the national cooperation. When the national cooperations are made well, country is happy, people are happy, relatively speaking, they then go one step above for regional cooperation. So that's what kind of an analogy, that when the countries go into regional cooperation. So now, we have been talking about the regional cooperation for a pretty long time, and there are strong history. European Union is an example where the national cooperation, national integration went into a regional cooperation, regional integration, a great success story. If we go by that, I think all we have to do, coming up with a common market, common principle, common rules, common regulation, common charter, and all those things, one by one, common parliament, all those things, if you look at an ASEAN or European Union. So what, at this stage, if I leave ASEAN, European Union, which are kind advanced, if I go into Bay of Bengal, that there is a fair amount of common challenges when you do for national planning for infrastructure or connectivity. If you take about digital, cyber security, anything on the digital economy or digital technology, everybody is connected. But there is the issue of interoperability. Those are not connected to each other. So this is where I think if the BIMSTEC Secretariat, BIMSTEC some supra body can take a lead and tell the people, the countries, that look through their focal points, that can you do this sort of linkages in a digital system that will help them while doing the planning. Everybody here still we follow a 5-year plan or annual plan kind of thing. So budget allocation will be done similarly. Similarly, the one which I have been talking and many others through this project, and Dr. Nihal, the integrated border or coordinated border. So at least Bangladesh, India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, all have connected by land and water. So they can easily come out with a regional plan, very much linked with the national plan on border connectivity development. So I think this is the need of the hour. If you really need to pick up, push the regional integration, in the front line. So I think this is what I will say briefly. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth, would you want to add something quickly?
Yes, just very quickly. I think this is a classical problem between the regional priorities and national priorities. But one thing that here we haven't spoken is that we've looked at it from the perspective of us as BIMSTEC without actually talking about the potential of the external parties that may come in and may provide funding for infrastructure projects. But at the end of the day, it may serve the BIMSTEC up to an extent, but may also serve and probably would need to serve the interest of the funding agency. So there are more players than just us within the BIMSTEC related to infrastructure. That's the only thing I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be associated, rather coordinating this session. I think we've listened to very rich, ideas, practical suggestions. As I said, bilaterally to Ruth, we extend our best wishes to Thailand and the BIMSTEC Secretariat to come up with a very concrete action plan to take this master plan ahead. And I do hope that they will hold consultations with the member countries, in a way that doesn't take too long. So thank you, all of you, to Ruth, to Prabhir, and Dr. Vignaraj for your valuable suggestions, and Dr. Raihan for assisting me from Colombo. I wish I were there, but these are bad times. As a matter of fact, I was invited to Colombo, but because of this pandemic, I said, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Maybe next time. So with this, thank you audience and thank you everybody for this session, and bon appetit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhandari. On behalf of LKI and SANEM, I must thank you and also all the participants. So we'll break for a lunch, and then we can't provide lunch to the Zoom participants anyway, but we'll come back on time. Thank you very much. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
May I invite Dr. Mendes to present a small token of appreciation to Dr. Prabhir there? So we will now break for lunch. Since we're running about 20 minutes behind, maybe if we can come back in about 50 minutes instead of an hour?
Yes, we'll come back by 2 p.m.
Sure. So in about 45 minutes. Thank you.